Welcome to the Astro Guy podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Zuhl. 2024 was a fun and exciting year for astronomers, whether novice, seasoned, or professional. There's been so much happening in our skies this year. Some of it has been normal and expected, like eclipses and increased solar activity, while we've had some pretty nice surprises in the sky as well. We've had some nice comets and much more. And all that has helped to make 2024 a great year for astronomy. 2024 saw several groundbreaking space missions. Here are some of the highlights. There were 6 integrated flights of SpaceX's Starship, the largest, most powerful rocket ever built. In October, with Integrated Test Flight 5, we watched the Super Heavy booster return and land back at the launch pad. It was like something out of a science fiction movie. 2025 should see even more exciting tests with Starship. SpaceX has also had the first private spacewalk during the Polaris Dawn mission in September, which orbited Earth for nearly 5 days with 4 civilian astronauts on board. During this flight, there were a total of 19 people orbiting the Earth, 4 in Polaris Dawn, 9 on the ISS, and 6 in the Chinese space station Tiangong. Boeing successfully launched 2 astronauts on the Starliner, but due to thruster issues, the astronauts remained on the ISS and should be coming home in March of this year. The empty Starliner was safely returned to Earth in August. NASA launched the Europa Clipper, which will rendezvous with Jupiter in 2030, while the ESA's Hera mission launched for its rendezvous with the asteroid Didymos. And the tiny helicopter on Mars, Ingenuity, flew its 72nd flight before crash landing. While it won't be flying anymore, it will be useful for communications and gathering other data for up to another 20 years. Expect 2025 to be even more exciting with more missions to come. This past April 8th, observers on a path from western Mexico to Maine and eastern Canada witnessed a spectacular total solar eclipse. Some observers had as much as 4 minutes and 28 seconds of totality. My plans to see the eclipse from Buffalo, New York were ruined by clouds, but thankfully, an early morning decision to drive to the opposite end of the state put us in Plattsburgh, New York, where we saw 3.5 minutes of totality through high, thin clouds. Some friends were able to take some great pictures of the eclipse. I was happy just to catch a video showing the moon's shadow coming and going before and after totality. The next total solar eclipse that will be visible in the continental U.S. won't take place until 2044. A highlight of the eclipse was the stunning view of the solar corona, the sun's outer atmosphere. Because the sun has reached the peak of its 11-year cycle, solar activity has been very high. Sunspots are seen in large groups. There have been several solar flares and CMEs that have ejected charged particles towards the Earth. When the time and direction of those CMEs are just right, we can experience auroral displays that are much more active and further from the poles than normal. There were several excellent aurora in 2024, including in April and May, as well as a spectacular display that was seen as far south as Arizona on October 10th. I was fortunate enough to have been outside setting up for a night of astrophotography when the aurora began lighting up the New Jersey skies with red, pink, and green shimmering curtains of light. From my location, I was able to see the aurora all the way to the southern horizon, even with the first quarter moon low in the south. It was an incredible evening of auroral displays. If you missed any of them, it's likely that the sun will remain near its peak of activity for most of this year, so there may be more aurora to be seen, especially for those of us that don't normally get to see it. Now, in 2024, there was a lot of talk about the star T Corona Borealis, a recurring nova that has outbursts roughly every 80 years. Astronomers measuring the light from this star saw a minor flare-up and then dimming, which is very similar to what was observed the last time that the system had an outburst. Normally, this star system is around 10th magnitude, meaning that it's only visible in a telescope or a long-exposure image. But when the star goes nova, it can brighten to around 2nd magnitude, making it visible to the naked eye for as long as a couple of weeks before fading back down again to around 10th magnitude. The predictions were that we'd see it go nova between April and October, but to date, it hasn't happened. It did brighten to about 9th magnitude and quickly faded. It's likely that the star will shine brightly in our skies in the near future. Will it be this year? Next year? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Now, as far as cosmic visitors go, comets have made their way into the list of the best of 2024 for sure. In April, we had Comet Pons-Brooks, a periodic comet that orbits the Sun every 71 years, putting on a pretty nice show, especially for those under dark skies. The comet peaked in brightness at around magnitude 4 and was an easy target in binoculars and a telescope. I was fortunate to have imaged it over several nights as it neared its best. There were several other comets that were seen in telescopes, binoculars, and long exposure images, but the comet of the year has to go to Comet Shushan Atlas, which reached naked eye brightness in September while low in the morning skies after its closest approach to the Sun. It reemerged in the evening skies in mid-October and for around 2 weeks was visible to the naked eye or an easy sight in binoculars. I was very happy to have imaged this comet a couple of times back in May and June when it was still around 10th magnitude. I didn't catch it during its morning apparition just prior to perihelion, but for almost 4 weeks in October and November, I was able to image the comet over several nights as I continue to learn the art of comet processing. To me, this was one of the best comets that I've ever seen. Only comets Hale-Bopp, Hyakutake, and Iris-Araki-Alcock were better in my book. Those three were all observed in the 20th century, so I'll rank Comet TA as number 1 so far in this century, but that's just my opinion. Comets are very unpredictable, and another Comet Atlas is set to put on a good show for those in the southern hemisphere. Moving a bit closer to home, there's been some pretty significant changes happening in the telescope industry. Astro camera manufacturer ZWO released several new cameras, including the ASI 2600 MC Air, which has a 26.4 megapixel camera, guide camera, and an ASI Air built into the unit. It sells for $1,999, which is a bargain. They also released several other cameras, and they finally released their rotator, which is now available for purchase. Recently, we've seen several new affordable smart telescopes coming on the market. ZWO recently released the C-Star S30, which you can now order for only $350. Dwarf Labs came out with the new Dwarf 3, which retails for $499. Both of these entry-level smart scopes have great features, are easily operated with an app from your phone or tablet, and can produce nice images quickly. On the higher end, Celestron released their Origin Smart Telescope, built around a 6-inch RASA, also known as a Rowe-Ackermann-Schmidt astrograph. This is a 6-inch or 152mm telescope, compared to the C-Star and Dwarf, which have objectives up to 50mm. It's also fast at f2.2 and comes with an altazimuth mount, tripod, removable camera, filter drawer, and more. With the tripod, the unit comes in at a hefty 41 pounds, and the system is pricey at $3,999. But you're getting a top-notch astrograph that will align itself, focus itself, find objects, and take images for you. The system is built so that you can swap the camera out as upgrades become available. So as we can see, the technology has changed a lot. Smart scopes have gotten better and more affordable, but a couple of players in the industry are no longer. I'm referring to Meade and Orion telescopes. Orion purchased Meade a while back, and this summer the company suddenly closed their doors. Meade was a big player from the 1970s through the early 2000s. Orion sold a lot of scopes, mounts, and accessories, but in the last several years they've had issues. There's also a class action lawsuit that's going on for people who've purchased Orion telescopes. So if you've purchased an Orion telescope in the last 20 years, you may be able to join the suit. Okay, that's enough about lawsuits. 2024 was a good year for astrophotography for me. I was able to take a lot of images with several different setups and image the moon, planets, comets, and lots of deep sky objects. Here are some of the best images that I've taken this year. Let's start with the solar system. Here's a close look at one of my favorite craters on the moon, Rufus Recta, with this cliff that when sunlight hits it just right, it looks like a scar running through the crater. You can locate it near the lunar snowman that we went over in our What's Up in the December 2024 Skies episode. A favorite region for me is Montes Apenninus. This striking mountain range is near the Apollo 15 landing site. I also was able to image the moon at various phases several times during the year. This year I've had some luck with Jupiter. Capturing this planet and the Galilean moons is always fun to do. I only managed to set up for planetary imaging a few times during the year. I normally try to do as much planetary imaging as I can around full moons, but the planets don't always cooperate with my schedule. Oh well. I only managed to capture Saturn one time in 2024, and that was in December, but Saturn is always fun to observe and image. Seeing it on the screen when I capture video is exciting. Even though the planet appears to bounce around because of our atmosphere, Saturn is always a welcome sight every time I see it. I also imaged distant Uranus as well, and while at a focal length of 1900 millimeters, the planet appears pretty small, but just capturing it was a lot of fun. While the moon and planets were fun to image and observe, there were a few comets that I had the pleasure of seeing and imaging. Comet Pons Brook was a real treat in April. I was able to see it in binoculars and imaged it on several nights. In May, I captured my first images of Comet Sushinshan Atlas, and then again in June. Then I had more than a dozen nights where I was able to image the comet in the fall. It was a lot of fun. I did get one night of imaging on Comet 13P Olbers in June. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see it visually, only via imaging. But the thing is, I'm really into deep sky objects, so when I'm imaging, that's what I really want to focus on. When I'm observing, my favorite objects are open clusters because they're all so different and some are really stunning. One of my favorite open cluster captures this year was M35 and NGC 2158 in Gemini. M35 is big and bright, while NGC 2158 appears faint and small. The irony is that NGC 2158 is about 4 times further away from us than M35, but if we're at the same distance, it would appear about the same size and brightness as its neighbor. M52 in Cassiopeia is one of my favorite open clusters, and I had 3 nights of imaging it. That particular imaging project, which is my most recent completed project, is of a pair of objects situated near M52, the Bubble Nebula and the Brain Nebula. The image is a total of 18 hours of exposure time, and it's about 1 3/4 degrees wide. I'd really like to image the Bubble Nebula at a higher focal length to be able to get an even closer look at it. Well, there's a project for the future. Another fun project that I wrapped up earlier in the year was this wide-field view of Orion's Belt and Sword. It was shot through a 135mm Samyang lens over multiple nights. I used exposures as short as 10 seconds and as long as 5 minutes to create a high dynamic range image with a total exposure of more than 12 hours. I'd like to add more time to this to bring out a lot of the faint dust and details. I did get several hours on M42 with my Teleview Pronto and a 0.8x reducer flattener, giving a focal length of around 380mm. This needs more exposure time and then a serious reprocessing to get the colors right. Another fun winter project was this wide-field view of the Rosette Nebula. This was also captured with the Samyang 135. I wanted to capture the details in the rosette with the faint wisps of nebulosity that look like long leaves coming off of the rosette. The exposure time on this image was 16 hours and 37 minutes. Enjoying working with the wide field setup, I captured an area around the Christmas tree cluster and the Cone Nebula. This whole region is teeming with beautiful red emission nebulae and blue reflection nebulae. There are several small open clusters in the image as well. Using the Pronto, I then captured about 13 hours of data to get a closer look at the Christmas tree cluster and Cone Nebula. There's a lot of fine details in the nebula. Hopefully this winter, I'll be able to capture even more data to highlight those details. In the spring, I spent a lot of time imaging galaxies like M63, the Sunflower Galaxy, along with several images of globular clusters. I enjoy spotting some tiny galaxies like PGC 59984, a magnitude 14.7 galaxy near M92 in Hercules. My favorite of the globular images is the very popular M13, the Great Cluster in Hercules. Near the edge of the image is the magnitude 12.65 spiral galaxy IC 4617. Imaging the cluster and galaxy together was a lot of fun. This is only 6 hours of integration time, so in the future I may get more data on this stunning pair. During the summer, I wanted to capture the 3 main parts of the Veil Nebula separately, so again the Pronto outfitted with an Optolong L Extreme filter was put to the task. The combined exposures totaled more than 33 hours. That image was the Eastern Veil Nebula. Here's the Western Veil Nebula. The filaments in the nebula and the colors always blow my mind. The last section imaged was Pickering's Triangle, which doesn't get as much attention as the other sections of the Veil. After capturing those 3 separately, I thought it would be fun to create a mosaic of the 3 images, although as you can see, I'll need to add data this summer to fill in the missing areas. Another autumn project was the Pac-Man Nebula, NGC 281. This was shot through the Pronto over 5 nights for more than 31 hours of exposure time. This nebula is just loaded with lots of interesting features and dark nebulae. There are Bach globules and lots of fine details visible in the image. Likely, we're going to do an episode in the future about processing an object like this in PixInsight. In the early fall, I also spent quite a bit of imaging time on the North American and Pelican nebulae. The total exposure time is 24 hours. This was shot wide field with the Samyang 135. Here in New Jersey, we had a string of almost perfectly clear nights that lasted for almost 2 weeks. I wanted to redo some earlier projects by going much deeper with the exposure times. So I set my sights on the galaxy M33 in Triangulum. Using the Pronto with the reducer, I captured 20 hours and 48 minutes of usable subframes for this image. I want to image it again using a filter that will help to bring out the red emission nebulae within the galaxy. Hopefully I can get that done soon. The last image that I'll share for this segment is a deep image taken through the Pronto of the Great Galaxy in Andromeda, M31. Unfortunately, the field of view isn't large enough to capture the entire galaxy, but the core, the satellite galaxies M32 and M110, along with the spiral arms and other features, were captured in the image. This is another one that I want to add more narrowband data to bring out the reddish H2 regions in the galaxy, another future project. The total exposure time on this image is 29 hours and 51 minutes. I have several other objects that I've imaged, and if you're interested, I've left a link in the show notes where you can see them. So I had a lot of fun doing astrophotography in 2024, but since the new year is upon us, there are some interesting things in the works for 2025. We will have several longer episodes featuring interviews with people involved in amateur astronomy and astrophotography. In 2023, we added the downloadable episode guides giving you information about the various deep sky objects discussed in the What's Up in the Sky This Month episodes. We're going to expand that a little bit, but we're also going to be adding in a challenge object each month. And while those objects might be a little fainter or tougher to spot from light-polluted areas, they'll be rewarding when you do find them, and you'll become a better observer in the process. We're also going to do more live imaging sessions that you can watch along with on YouTube. If the weather cooperates, we'll do a live session for the Mars occultation in January, as well as other events. I'll also do some EAA, or electronically assisted astronomy sessions, where I'll do a live broadcast on YouTube, and we'll take short exposures of several different deep sky objects, allowing you to see the image as it builds in real time. This will be combined with a live commentary and chat, so please make sure to follow our group page on Facebook for notices on when we'll be doing these sessions. All in all, we're going to try to bring you more astronomy in a fun and interesting way as we continue to grow the channel. Well, that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you found our time together to be fun and helpful. If you have questions or episode suggestions, please email us at astroguypodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail or a text at 973-404-0380. If you're not already a member, please join the Astro Guy Podcast group on Facebook. You can also visit our YouTube channel, the Astro Guy Podcast, for past episodes and other surprises. Please do all the podcast and YouTube things, such as like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really, really, really helps us. If you'd like to support the Astro Guy Podcast and YouTube channel, you can do that by buying us a cup of coffee. The money is used to maintain and update the equipment that we use to create and publish the show. The link is in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us, and may your skies be clear. As always, Carpe Noctem, seize the night. I'm Wayne Zuhl, and this was the Astro Guy Podcast. Thank you for listening. As always, your questions, comments, and suggestions are welcome. Keep wondering. Keep your eyes on the sky. Have fun. Carpe Noctem. Seize the night.